Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping right into a huge question, a really huge one actually. In any country, who's really in charge? Who calls the shots? Well, the answer lies in this incredible revolutionary concept that is basically the foundation of modern democracy, the sovereignty of the people.
So let's just get right to it. This is a question that has literally built and broken nations for centuries. Who has the final say? Who is the supreme authority? Who gets to make the rules we all live by?
For, most of human history, the answer was pretty straightforward, right? It was the king, the queen, the emperor. Power was absolute. End of story. But then this totally radical new idea came along and just completely flipped the script. It basically said, hold on a second. Real power, legitimate power, doesn't come down from God to some ruler. No, it flows up from the people to their government.
And to really get just how revolutionary that was, you got to understand what came before it. We need to look at the old system it replaced, a system built entirely on this one idea, the divine right of kings. Now, this wasn't just some political theory you'd read in a book. No, this was a deeply held belief. The core idea was that God himself created the state, and the king, well, he was just God's chosen manager down here on earth. And what that meant was that the king's rule was absolute. He could pretty much do whatever he wanted, no questions asked.
And that logic had some pretty serious consequences. You had monarchs like Britain's James I laying it out plain as day. They said, look, being a king isn't just a job. It's a divine calling, and it's passed down through my family's blood. This meant the king answered to God and God alone. So get this, if you dared to resist the king, you weren't just a traitor, you were a sinner. You were going against God's will. That's heavy stuff.
Okay, so you can probably guess that a system like that, a system of total power, wasn't going to last forever. And you'd be right. Eventually, it got challenged by this incredibly powerful and, to the kings, very dangerous new idea, the social contract. This concept was like a whole new operating system for society. It just completely rewrote the rules about where a government gets its power. Now, an idea this big doesn't just pop out of nowhere. It was built up, piece by piece, by some really brilliant thinkers. You had Thomas Hobbes starting things off, basically saying people agree to be ruled just to avoid total chaos. Then John Locke comes along and adds this crucial next layer. He says, yeah, but the whole point of that government is to protect our natural rights, life, liberty, and property. And then Jean-Jacques Rousseau comes in and delivers the knockout punch. He argued that any government that's actually legit has to follow the general will of the people. The power comes from them.
And let's be super clear here. These weren't just fancy ideas for philosophers to debate in stuffy rooms. No way. This was like intellectual dynamite. These ideas were the sparks that lit the fuse on real-world revolutions, revolutions that toppled thrones and created brand new countries.
I'm talking about huge upheavals, like the American Revolution in 1776 and the French Revolution in 1789. These were a direct attack on that whole old world order of kings and queens. The mission was crystal clear: dismantle the monarchies, tear down the old system, and replace it with something new. A system where the will of the people was the ultimate law, written down in a constitution for everyone to see. And you can see this idea captured perfectly right here. Just listen to this from the American Declaration of Independence. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That one line says it all. It's the whole revolution in a nutshell. Power isn't a gift handed down from on high. It's more like a loan, granted from below, by the people.
Okay, so that's the big, dramatic history. But what about today? How does this grand idea of power to the people actually, work? To see it in action, all we have to do is look at the blueprint for any modern democracy, its constitution. And for this, we're going to use the constitution of Sri Lanka as a fantastic example. So, what's great about the Sri Lankan constitution is how clearly it breaks this all down. It says that sovereignty of the people isn't just some vague concept. It's actually made up of 3 specific things: governmental power, your own fundamental rights, and the franchise, which is just another way of saying your right to vote.
And here's the really cool part, how it all connects. The legislative power, the power to make laws, is exercised by Parliament, which is elected by the people. The executive power, running the country, that's exercised by the president, who is also elected by the people. And even the judicial power, the courts, gets its authority from Parliament. You see the pattern here, right? Every single branch of government traces its power directly back to the people through their vote. Okay,
This brings us to what is, honestly, maybe the most important piece of the entire puzzle. It's the part of sovereignty that affects you, personally, every single day, and that is your fundamental rights.
The best way to think about these rights is like they're the customer protection clauses in that social contract we're talking about. They draw a hard line in the sand. They tell the government you can come this far, but absolutely no further. They're basically your personal shield against the state having too much power.
And modern constitutions, like Sri Lanka's, don't just wave their hands and talk about rights in a vague way. They get super specific. They list out enforceable protections, things like freedom from torture, the right to be treated equally, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. And the government isn't just, asked to respect these things. It is legally required to protect and even promote them for every single person.
So here it is, the main takeaway. It's really tempting to think of these three components, government power, your rights, and your vote, as totally separate things. But they're not. They are all woven together. They're inseparable. Your vote is what gives the government its power in the first place, and your rights are what put a strict limit on that power. They're really just two sides of the same coin, the coin of sovereignty.
So this entire incredible journey, all the way from the divine right of kings to the sovereignty of the people, it all lands right here, with you. It means power doesn't just rest with some faceless mob called the people. It rests with you as an individual. You are protected by these rights, and you are armed with a vote. So the final question isn't a historical one or a political one. It's a personal one. Your rights are your power. So how do you use them?